Hey everyone, Seymour Pezza here from Promar and thanks for watching again. We're going to be sitting down with Gil Hernandez today. You guys may have seen him on all of our how-to lobster videos, a lot of resources that we have. So today we're going to be covering more of the lobster stuff. We've already covered everything from what gear to use, how to get your boat situated, and some of our other videos. So today we're going to be covering some of those other things that people don't typically talk about, but they're very important in order to have a successful day on the water when lobster hooping. So Gil, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your experience with lobster hooping and how we came to work together here at Promar. You're a pro staffer with us. So talk about all your experience and kind of what you bring into the table when you talk about lobster hooping.
Yeah, for sure. My name again, Gil Hernandez. Everyone calls me Gil Rockit on social media. I've been super blessed, by the way, to be part of this company for about 10 years now. And the way I got started was I'm a big kayak fisherman. Fished a lot of kayak tournaments, and then in 2009 I was Angler of the Year, which got me a lot of exposure to other marketing, and Bass Pro Shop was one of my other big sponsors as well. And I remember one buddy, he was talking about lobsters, you know, and I remember fishing bass, because I'm a big bass guy, fishing bass and seeing the buoys out there and not really knowing what it was all about, you know. And I've been doing this since like 2007, and I was just fascinated by the fact that you can get a lobster from a kayak, you know, and I thought, man, I want to do that. You know, I want to go catch lobster. I not only want to catch bass, but I want to catch some lobsters as well, and do a lot of seminars all over with bass seminars. And then I got approached by a gentleman here who used to work here, and he was just telling me, hey, we need a guy that can do it off a kayak, and I was doing it prior for a year, and just kind of getting some experience and kind of get my feet wet with it. But then getting on with Promar, and then just really using the gear, right, to where it's from, to what it's for, and then making the gear better and better and better. It's just been a awesome journey for me to get all the kinks, right? And I think that's the number one thing with lobster hooping, and what we talk about in the seminars and on the videos is organization and how to make things work for you for the night, you know, and make, especially in a kayak, because you have such limited space, or in a small boat. And so over these last, I would say 10 years, it's just been a tremendous experience as far as the new product we put out, and most importantly, the content that we put out to our viewers on how to get this stuff in use. You know, back in the days, 10 years ago, social media was on a rise, but now it's a huge thing. We can actually bring this context to your the floor of your living room, or your office, or your cell phone in a dentist's office or a doctor's office. You'd be watching a video on how to hoop. And so yeah, that's kind of how I got started. It was a slow process, but it's always a learning process. And I tell everybody this in my seminars: I don't know everything. I wish I did, I don't, and I'm still constantly learning about the product and about the conditions that we fish in and the habits of a lobster.
And it seems like every time, I mean, me and you have shared a lot of time on the water on my boat.
Yes.
And then on the company boat, fishing harbor, outside of the harbor, everywhere, all around Southern California. But it seems like every time we go out, we learn something. Like, we always kind of have that talk at the end of the trip. Hey dude, you know, this really worked really well for us this time. We need to keep doing this. Or hey, next season we need to try this again, or that. So every time you go out, you make it a point to learn something new, right?
Yeah, every bay is going to be different. Every island is going to be different. Every condition, as far as what we're going to talk about today, moon phases and tides and bait conditions and cold water conditions, and the habits of a lobster. You know, different bays and different harbors, they bite or they crawl sometimes on different tide swings, you know, and it's doing the homework where we get off of Long Beach or something. We say, man, we saw the bugs crawl better on an incoming tide or an outgoing tide. And man, we really didn't get much on this slack tide. And what should we be doing on a slack tide? We should be changing bait cages, doing certain things, or even certain nights of the day where we go out and say, man, the bugs, they really crawled at 9 to midnight, you know? So is it really important for us to put our boat on the water at 5 o'clock, you know? And sometimes when we've been out in the water, we see boaters coming in, packing it up, and that's when they're actually catching the bugs, is when everybody's coming in. So, you know, doing the homework, doing the research, and putting the time on the water.
So one thing that I really want to briefly touch on before we really dive into everything, and what we're going to be diving in on today is, you know, typically when you see videos on YouTube and you're trying to get into the sport of lobster hooping, you see a bunch of how to rig, what things you need, and we've already covered all that. Yes. All that can be found on our resource page on our YouTube channel. Today we're going to be covering things that are not normally talked about, like Gil mentioned, lunar phase, solar phase, tide movement, different applications that you can use to get ready to go hooping, weather, just all these different topics that people don't really touch on when you're Googling how to lobster hoop. So one thing that I want to mention is me and you have both experienced where we go out in the season and frustration,
yes,
right?
For sure.
We go out multiple trips and we just can't figure out how to lobster crawl. And I just don't think there's enough resources out there to where you can really say, oh, this is the way that lobster tend to move throughout the night, or this is how they feed. Me and you have been out there and we've done all our research and we've had great nights, but then we've also had the same conditions, you know, and it's been horrible nights where we get zeroed. One thing that I want to mention is when you're getting into this, I think the biggest thing that will benefit you in the long run is keeping a log.
Yes, for sure.
So when you start getting into it, keep a log. And some of the information that we're going to be talking about today, like I mentioned, is water temperature, solar activity, lunar activity, tides. Log all those things when you're going out. That way, you know, when you're into the season, you have 10 days worth of logs, you can kind of see, okay, this is what the tide movement was on this day and we killed it. And then this was the tide movement on the day where we didn't do so well. So we can see like, oh, it was outgoing tide when we killed it, or it was incoming tide when we killed it. So now you know what to look for. So keeping a log is going to be huge for you to nail or figure out what's working and what's not. A lot of people just go out and they kind of wing it, or they do well, but there's no way of keeping track of what was going on that day that made them so successful, right? Outside of what they can control, because a lot of times it's things that you cannot control that make you successful, like weather and tide movement. So keeping a log, I think personally, is very important for when you're getting into the sport, because that's going to help you nail down what works and what doesn't.
And if I can add on to that, a good friend of the company and a good friend of mine, Jim Salazar, Jim, he is like the guru of lobster.
He literally wrote the book on lobster hooping.
And he's just a great guy, and he would text me before, even because I would be logging, he'd be like, hey Gil, it's coming that time. You need to start hooping that 65 feet. You need to start hooping the 80 feet, because he knows, you know, he knows the log, he knows the season. And just like anything that you do, like we were just talking about ducks, you know, like I like shooting ducks, and I don't really go shoot the ducks in November, you know, especially here, it's a little warm and you need to know, and I keep a log of the ducks when the ducks fly, just like the lobsters as well. Like when did we do good? At what times? What month are they crawling in closer? We have to put our nets in a little deeper. Because a lot of times without logging, you're dropping your nets where lobsters are intendedly crawling at that specific time, and you need to know when to go deeper or even go shallower.
Right.
You know. Exactly.
So let's get right into this now. What are some of the tools that you use to give you the best odds when you're going out hooping?
Okay, there's a ton of resources out there. You definitely want to get on a moon phase app, which there's some that we were talking about that you recommended. There was a
Tides for Fishing is a really good website. That's the one that I personally use.
Fish Dope, those kind of things. But I think what's the biggest game changer in today's fishing, even hooping world, is the Navionics apps. You know, the Navionics apps are something that has changed the way people have fished and have mapped, because you can actually bring the resources now to your personal cell phone. And it's not specifically before you go in your garage or you go on your boat and you be sitting in your boat in your driveway trying to figure out stuff. But now you can actually sync the Navionics from your phone to actually your fish finder, and then you can transfer from cards to different fish finders. And what is super cool about the Navionics app is the overlays, right? The overlay where you can actually see the bottom of the structure, you can see the rock piles, you can see the shades of the holes that are going to be fished or hooped. And what we talked about in the seminars is that lobster have a lot of characteristics as a bass. As a calico bass or sand bass need food, structure, and current. So a lot of those places where you see these commercial traps, throughout the year, those are like prime bass spots.
Yeah.
And I always tell people in my seminars, man, this is the time you need to be going around on your kayak or your boat, marking these spots, because once those traps are pulled,
those are great calico
sand bass spots. And so the same thing. So if you become a great bass fisherman, and whether you're in Mission Bay or Long Beach Harbor, San Pedro, you're going to become a good hooper as well. I remember sitting, man, gosh, I would say 15 years ago now, maybe longer. One of my all-time favorite people, Mike Iaconelli.
Oh yeah.
You know, he was doing a seminar, and I was in the front row, and the whole seminar, all he talked about was mapping. He talked about mapping. Every lake that he goes to, he makes sure he knows what the bottom looks like. He knows with the map. He has notes that he's taken on, because finding that structure is super important. So that documentation, but not only that, he talks about networking as well. And I think as hoopers and as fishermen, having a core group of people that you can trust, first of all, you can trust. I think with lobster, a lot of people.
Well, it's fishermen, right?
Yeah,
in
fishermen.
General.
Yeah,
in general.
I did the tournament thing for a long time, and it's like, a guy would tell you straight in the face, like, hey man, the fish are biting over here.
Yeah.
And you're just like, are you sure about that, man? And it's like, and I guess sometimes that's why I probably wasn't the greatest. I mean, I feel like I was a great tournament fisherman, but like, I wasn't really good at the game, the game of like the poker face, because I'm like, oh yeah, I caught my fish over here. It's like, all right, and then that's where the fish were,
Yeah.
But hooping, you go on all these forums, Bloody Decks, or you go any kayak forum, and people, hey man, I want to go catch lobster. Where do I go? And people are like, kick rocks, man. Like go do your own time. Go put your time in the water. And there's some truth behind that, because a lot of these guys like myself and you, we put a lot of time on the water, and we put a lot of time away from our families, away from the things to do what we love and to find these structures. But I think having a good mapping system, and I think what it comes down to, some of that Iaconelli talked about in his seminar, was that you pick one thing in fishing. Like, he's a largemouth bass fisherman, right? And the cool thing, I think, about California coast, Southern California, is like, we do tuna, we do Dorado, we have
a mixed bag.
Yeah, a mixed bag of everything. But the great hoopers are the ones that put all their time and effort into that.
Those are the guys that you see on Instagram all the time with holding the big bugs.
Yeah, and because they don't have the other things that they do. They're
concentrated.
It's in a season, and they know, like, hey, we have hooping season, and then we have our tuna, our bass, or whatever we do. And I'm kind of that way. Like, I have my bass season. I'm up in the Sierras, but once lobster season rolls around, it's like I am focused on this,
We just did the sit down with Wilberto, and that's one thing that he mentioned, because he's running a 4-pack Wet Willie sport fishing, and he talks about, their gas pedal to the floor tuna fishing right now, and we've had a great Dorado season here in Southern California, so he's doing all that. But come lobster season, all the kill bags, all the tuna stuff comes off the boat, and it's all about lobster fishing. So he doesn't care if the tuna are still biting. He's putting all of his focus on the lobster season, and that's why he does so well during the lobster season, because he doesn't really care about everything else that's going on. He's so focused on lobster. Yeah,
and there's during the winter months, you got the yo-yo yellowtail going off. You got rock fishing going on. You got white sea bass coming in. But staying to the game, like if you want to be good at hooping lobsters, you're going to do a lot of your homework on your couch, with an app or looking through apps and learning. Just my seminar this week, I've had 2 seminars this week, and telling people, listen, you need to understand tide movements. You need to understand moon phases. You need to understand weather, and not just how hot or cold it's going to be, but like the wind. And I told you this, I was so excited to go fishing this week. I had a few hours to figure something to do. So I went, caught some sand bass and calico bass on my kayak, and I looked at everything but the wind, and it's like, man, a veteran guy like me, you forget stuff like that. And I got completely like blown off the water in my kayak. I had a great time, believe me, but it's a little stressful when the wind's blowing and almost knocking you over, and you want to make sure when you go out that all those safety aspects are there. Like, you want to make, are you going to get the perfect night? Hopefully you do. I can look back right now on times where I was in Dana Point on an opener, and the great thing about Dana Point and the opener, they always have the music festival, right? Okay. And it's on the beach.
So you're jamming while you're hooping.
So, dude, last year, man, it's like I'm hooping, listen to Pearl Jam. It's like, this is great. No wind. It's just like the hooping wasn't as good, but like the conditions were perfect. It's like, man, I got Pearl Jam playing on the beach. I got a good tide movement. I got dark. I got no wind. It's great. Are all nights gonna be like that? No. You're gonna have to hoop in some really cold, maybe even some windier conditions, which we've experienced.
The last few years, it's actually been a lot better because we've had El Nino years, so it's warmer temperature than 5-10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So we've been kind of spoiled, but now we're getting into this cold cycle. I mean, it's weird to say cold cycle because we've just had the best mahi fishing ever.
I know, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's gonna get colder, and we're gonna get more frigid temperatures. You're gonna wanna wear some heavy rain gear, heavy warm gear while you're out there. But one thing that you touched on that I thought was interesting was that you mentioned now you're doing most of your homework on your couch at home.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is new. You know, back in the day, if you wanted to hoop net, guys that were doing it 5-10 years ago, you literally had to go out on your boat, use your fish finder, drive the harbor, scope and like, oh, there's something there. There's structure. Save that spot. We're gonna come back there for hooping. Whereas now we have navionics. I mean, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but you know, the thing that we want to do here is at Promar, and Gil is a big part of it, is when you go to a store and you're looking at hooping gear because you're interested, the guy's gonna tell you, okay, this is what you need, and he's right. I mean, the Promar gear is what you need to be successful, but that's only half of it. You need the knowledge to know where to put that gear, where to place it, when to place it. And so that's kind of what we wanna do, what we're doing here, me and Gil. So now you have the tools to do all the other 50% at home before you even get on the water. So the Navionics app, that's something that has only come about in the last, I wanna say 5 years or so. I mean, it's always been available, mapping has always been available on your fish finders, but now you can do it from your phone, and then you can take your phone with you. Guys on kayaks that maybe don't have a fish finder, they just use their phone now, and it's huge. I mean, the detail that these apps have now. You can literally sit at home or on lunch, or like you mentioned, in the doctor's office waiting room, and you're like, oh, look at that. That looks like a nice little rock pile 50 feet from where I launched my boat. And then you try it out and you get one lobster, but that's huge.
Yeah, one lobster shoot. And I think too, like I saw this last year, I saw a kayak with an iPad on the kayak.
I've seen boats. I mean, I do it. I use my
do.
Yeah, and I've seen guys that are posting on Instagram, and they're tuna boats or you know, island boats, and they have the iPad there with Navionics set up on the dash. So it's a game changer. It's a huge game changer.
It's a big game changer.
And you know, you're not spending a couple $1,000s on a fish finder. You're spending $10-20 on a subscription.
For a subscription.
For the year. And it gives you just so much detail. You can literally find wrecks, you can find rock piles, you can find things where these lobster are going to be hiding. And it's just another benefit or an asset that you're going to want to use for lobster hooping. And we'll actually do a video explaining, we'll actually demonstrate how to use the app Navionics for lobster hooping. We'll have to put that together.
On the water stuff is huge for us. I think too, even though you have the resources and tools, it's just like patty fishing, right? When you're fishing Dorados. We were out fishing Dorados last week, and it's like, just because there's a rock structure there or a kelp patty there, will there be fish under it? We're hoping so, you know, but there still could be. We're not trying to tell you guys that, like, if you get the Navionics app and you find a rock pile, yes, conditions will tell us that there's lobster here, but will there be lobsters? We hope so.
It's fishing.
And it's fishing, and this is the beauty of what we do is, I think a lot of times, and I get this, is you do a seminar, you get a large crowd, you get people pumped up, and they just think to believe that if they just throw a lobster net on a rock pile, they're gonna get a legal limit of lobster. Things aren't just gonna get handed to you. You really have to work. And that's where I really appreciate the people that sit in a seminar. Because I was explaining to the folks this week that, like, you're doing the time, right? You're putting the time in to learn the knowledge. Even you folks here that are watching this video today, you're spending your time on watching this. When most people just say, hey, we're just gonna go out, throw a net, and then we're not catching anything, so we're just gonna leave all of our nets at the dumpster, right? And then the guy that really he sees those nets, but like they don't want to put the time in, you know. And then the lobster crawl all year, you know. And that's what Jim is a big man. Lobsters, he don't even go out. He tells me I don't even go out for a few months because I don't want to deal with the crowds. And you'll notice too when you do your research and when you do your logging, when the crowds kind of dissipate.
Oh yeah.
And that's the biggest part. Like, hey, I'm gonna wait for 3 weeks for the crowds to go away because the lobsters are still crawling. But the hype of it, right, is gone. But the hype is still there if you do your homework,
right?
You know, and I think that's where people miss out on the opportunity during hooping season is it goes all the way through March. And those later months are when you're getting the bigger bugs and when you're hooping and there's nobody out there. You have the waters all to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think if you're using all the tools available, you up your chances quite a bit to having a successful day on the water, to actually finding the lobster. So it's all about you actually doing that homework before you get on the water, and then using the tools that you have for the water, the best tools, which is, you know, the right hoop net, the right gear, the right float, the right length of rope, the right bait cage. So all of that comes into play, but you can definitely increase your chances of actually having a successful day by doing all that research beforehand. And so we mentioned Navionics, that's a game changer and that's gonna help you tremendously. What are some other things that you like to look at before? I know weather is a big deal.
Yeah, weather's a big thing. So typically I'll just kind of talk about when I'm gonna go out hooping. Like let's say today, me and you're gonna go out. I would always look at first the tide. I wanna see a tide swing. When the tide is moving, when the tide is slacked, different places that we talked about has a better incoming tide or outgoing tide. And then of course I'm gonna look at the moon, you know. Moon phase is huge as far as lobsters are concerned.
It's funny because everybody, you know, I hear it all the time. It's like moon phase, what's moon phase?
Yeah.
Everything that people typically hear about when it comes to lobster is sunset, sunrise, or mainly sunset, right? Because everybody knows that when you're going hooping, you do it at night, but you head out right before sunset, you put your nets in the water, and then by the time the sun sets, you're fishing.
Yeah.
So, but nobody takes into consideration what the moon is doing. Yeah,
the moon is huge. So for me, a lot of hoopers would just know like, oh, we're not gonna hoop on a full moon, right? So the way the moon plays an effect, and we talked about this in our videos, is that, you know, lobsters don't tend to like brightness, right? Because they're getting preyed upon. We're not the only things that eat lobster, right? So, but it typically would change in a harbor setting like Long Beach Harbor, where if there's a light on 24 hours at night, whether it's a parking lot or something.
They're accustomed to it.
Yeah, they're accustomed to that lighting. So a lot of times the moon won't really play a factor in what you're doing. But when you start hooping breakwalls and stuff, where these lobsters they really like the darkness. And so you have a moon rise and a moon set, you know, so knowing if it's gonna be a full moon that week, you know, well, when does it rise, you know? So say it is a full moon, but the moon sets at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, but sunset is at 5, well, that's gonna give you about 4.5 hours to hoop. Yeah. And some of the bigger bugs, one of my buddies, Chris Boyer, he owns the shop down at Pure Water Sports in Oceanside. I remember one time I was coming on the water and I knew it was gonna be a full moon. I was kind of frustrated, and he was just like coming off because he knew the moon phase really well, and I was just gonna play with it. And he had this ginormous bug, you know, that he got, and he's like, during a full moon, you know? But yeah, it was during a full moon, but it was during the rise of the moon. It wasn't during the set of the moon. And that set of the moon is when it's the brightest. And you'll see it rising, like you'll be hooping, you're like, and to me it's like a time clock, right? Okay guys, it's coming. And when it's set, it's its brightest, you know? And things would change with weather. You know, if it's overcasted or cloudy, well, it's gonna hide that moon a little bit better, you know? And so I think that it's important to get on these apps that will teach you, even some basic weather apps that do moon rise and moon set.
I like windy, just for general weather.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to know if it's going to be windy that night, or if it's going to rain, anything like that. Windy's a really good one. But in regards to moon rise, moon set, all of that information, is there something that you prefer?
You know, I was using a Navy app. I can't remember the exact Navy app, but a lot of times I'll just type in moon phase. Okay. You know. And there's all all the apps are pretty similar as far as when it comes to tide and stuff. And we'll talk about tide in a second. But with the moon, you'll know, like on the weather app, it'll tell you like full moon or crescent moon or whatever moon. And it's important to know that the app has the actual set and rise. Like the moon rise and the moon set. And knowing that's part of what's gonna make your day, you know, because some people don't wanna go out during a full moon, you know, and I don't, honestly, I don't blame them, you know, for not going out, depending, if the moon's set at 5 o'clock and if the moon is saying it's set at 2 o'clock, because you know and I know that when you go outside your door having like 3 or 4 o'clock, you can see the moon already, you know, and it's like, okay, it's gonna be bright today, you know, or if the sunrise and the moon set is at the same time, well, you're gonna be hooping a bright moon, you know? And, you know, there's always some guy in the seminar like, I just kill it on a full moon. That's great, man. I'm like, hey, you always learn something. Am I gonna put the time out there? I'm probably gonna wait, you know? I'm probably gonna wait, maybe stay home that week and do some maintenance on my nets and freshen things up. And I think that's a lot of things that people don't do, is they don't maintenance their equipment, you know? But the second thing would be tide, you know, knowing a tide swing. And what we talk about in our seminars often is that the lobsters have the same characteristics as a bass. They need food, structure, and current. You know, current is huge for these lobsters to get them crawling. The more tide swing that you have, the better it is. And some people, when they're not used to tide, when they hear tide, they just think tide in general. They don't think of a tide swing, like the amount of water going in or the amount of water going out, okay? So if your tide, if that night, if you look on your tide chart, you only have like 2 foot of movement, right? Or the ocean's gonna rise 2 feet. But like the next week, it's gonna rise 6 feet and drop 6 feet. You know, when you're hooping, this is what we call swings, tide swings, you know? And the bigger the swing of water rushing in and water rushing out is gonna give you the best chance, at least for me when I'm looking on my week, to go hooping in that specific area, whether it be Long Beach, Cabrillo, Newport, down San Diego, wherever it may be. And knowing too the documentation when we talk about it, what crawls the best? Is it an incoming tide? Is it an outgoing tide? You know, and these are things that we've done on the boat too as well. It's like, hey man, we done better on this incoming or outgoing, and then you have the slack tide. You know, it's like, well, the sun's gonna set at 5 o'clock, but now we have a slack tide from 4 to 6. And usually, it's funny, usually during hooping season, the slack tide is at the worst moment of the day. It's like sunset is at 5 and slack tide's at 6:30, you know? And I think that's the part, like, well, what are you gonna do, you know? Because the water's gonna start moving again at 9 o'clock. So what I usually do is I'm sabiki bait, you know, I'm getting some fresh bait set up for the night or for the next week.
There's no urgency to get your hoop nets in the water.
Yeah, there's no urgency too. And I think a lot of people not understanding tide, and this is where people lose nets, you know, either lose nets or make their nets in a caution dangerous state where they don't assume, hey, we're gonna go out at 5 and right now it's a slack tide, but the water's gonna rise 4 feet. And then they throw their hoop net out for that slack tide. And then when the tide rises, they lose their hoop net, right?
Yeah.
And the next morning, the bass guy goes out there and he sees hoop nets floating around, you know? And because those guys have lost them, you know, or else you gotta wake up the next morning, hey, I gotta wait till the next outgoing tide to get my hoop net, you know? And I think that people, not only is it good for fishing, but it's good for preparing how to set your nets up for the night. I know that if I have a 3 feet of tide movement, I'm gonna adjust my nets for that throughout the night. Because if I don't, we're gonna have some bobbing buoys or something sunken underneath, or I'm gonna have 5 or 6 feet of extra, or maybe 10 feet of extra rope that's gonna harm another boat driving around.
Yeah. One other thing that I wanna touch on in regards to tides, and you mentioned placement of nets.
Yes.
So that's another thing that I take into consideration when I'm fishing. Depending on where I'm fishing, the tide is gonna tell me how to set up my hoop nets.
Yes.
Because what you want, so let's say we're fishing the break wall. This is the break wall here. This is, let's say Long Beach Harbor. if the tide is incoming, that means that the current is moving this way,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to fish the inside of the break wall, because what's happening is your bait scent is getting carried
Yes.
away from where the lobster lives.
Exactly.
You want to put your hoop net on the outside, because then that scent is going to be carried into the lobster's den. They're going to go looking for that
Yes.
scent, where that food source is coming from. So that is a big thing also, because if you're not paying attention to the tide and the way that the incoming or outgoing tide is going, and you're placing your hoop net on the wrong side of that structure,
Yeah.
that's not good.
Yeah.
You want to make sure to place it on in the right place, so that scent is carried into where the
Yes.
lobster are, and then they go looking for that bait and
Yes.
crawl into your
Yeah, and that's something we consider every night. And
Yeah.
you hit on something very important that I think a lot of people, when hooping, I get this question even throughout the week. I just had an email just right now before the podcast started, was scent. And I think that through the night, it's important to have that fresh scent, you know? And that's where like the Bite On products, been working with Tony from Bite On, and the sprays and the pads that we have, and just, you want that scent, so that when that tide comes in, or that current, it's scenting the whole water around you. And the thing is that a lot of hoopers are getting in, they're doing their homework, right? So they're not just using the straight mackerel anymore. They're using scents now, right? They're starting to use some higher scent, maybe stinkier bait or fresher bait or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
They're knowing the area of what, hey man, salmon heads work better here, or mackerel works better here, or bluefin tuna heads work better here, or whatever it may be, and placing your net. I think the great thing about the Navionics, as we talked about, is net placement. And on our video, our hooping video in Long Beach, we actually talked just very briefly about what I like to do is I like to find valleys, so like I like to find if I can find, typically for me, if I can find 2 high spots and then a valley below, and we can just hit that bottom valley to where the lobster can come crawl down and eat, that's like the ideal spot for me, because then when the scent gets pushed around, it gets kind of washing machined around in that little canyon. Can you always get it in that spot? It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And it's great to have the fish finders and the electronics, because a lot of you can throw your net over and you can actually see your net sinking. And I'm just looking the whole time and I'm like, dude, we hit it. We've known too, we hit that spot we want to be in. Our net is perfectly set up in that valley. Sometimes we'll kill it. Sometimes there's nothing there, right? And that's all about doing our homework, right?
Yeah.
Doing our homework. But I do highly agree with you, is when you know those tides, know which way the tide is moving your scent around the area,
So now we touched on weather a little bit. What is your experience with the different types of weather that may occur when you go out hooping, and the success rate? Does that play a factor in if the lobster crawl or not? Whether it's a warm night, whether it's a cold night, whether it's raining, whether, just all the different weather scenarios.
Yeah.
What is your correlation to being successful with the different types of weathers?
So for me, the worse the weather, the better the crawl for me. And unfortunately, it's that way. Like I know when we get big storms in, it really makes the water real dirty. It brings a lot of, stirs up the bottom, and it gets those lobsters active. Remember, they're bugs, they're like roaches basically.
I agree with you. And I think part of that is because the water's dirty, so they feel safer.
Yes, they do.
Their predators can't see them as easily. So I personally think that has something to do with it.
Yeah, and they're, lobsters are out there trying to survive. They want to eat, like I have taken lobsters home and they're still eating. They're eating in my ice chest. I'll leave a piece of mackerel in there and they don't know they're about to get eaten, and they're just chewing on a piece of mackerel. I remember one time I put a couple of lobsters in my live well and I had a calico bass in there, legal calico bass, that I was gonna release for a picture. And this lobster, man, he had it wrapped up and he was just trying to chew its head off, man. I'm like, man, this guy, they just want to eat all day.
Yeah,
and so they're just looking for food. And so I find it better in the colder seasons, which again, California people, right? We want this perfect weather, right? We want to go hooping in board shorts, flip-flops, right? We want it to be perfect. But when you have that foul weather gear on, the bibs and the boots, and you're ready, because that's when the lobsters are more active, and I think that's when a lot of people kind of burn out, and I want to encourage all you folks at home that don't give up. Don't give up. Buy the right gear. I always say on the kayak, dress to swim and rig to flip. Be ready. You will get wet. It's like the Shamu show at SeaWorld. You're gonna get wet. But you're gonna have a good time doing it. And some of these pictures you may see on social media, you have these folks holding up lobsters and they're in bibs and rain gear and they look cold. Yeah, they're cold, but what's gonna make the night go along better is planning for that night. Right? Yeah. What's the weather going to be like? Is it going to be wind? Well, let's get the right gear, okay? Not just the hoop nets. Let's get the right weather gear, the right boots, gloves if we need it, bring some hot chocolate on the boat, right? Comfort things that make your night be really comfortable, having dry socks on, to where when we go to the islands or something, it's like, man, I just feel totally comfortable, that I'm not hooping in a t-shirt and jeans,
freezing,
and soaking wet.
Yeah.
I mean, who's gonna have fun freezing on a boat?
Yeah.
You may be slaying the lobsters, but you're just plain out miserable.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I've done good. Openers, of course, is the opener. It's hit or miss. Last year was a miss for us. And during the seasons, you have things that happen. You have oil spills that shut things down, and you have sometimes things that get closed off, and you're gonna have to work around that thing. Just like you have to work around weather. And I think that with weather, whether the weather's cold, whether the weather's hot, whether the weather, no matter the weather, whether we like it or not, we're gonna go hooping, man. And so I think it's the experience of let's go hoop on a whatever day, right? And let's document. I think that
some guys don't have the luxury of being able to go whenever they can.
Yeah.
Right? So they have to try and take advantage of the days they can go, whether
Yeah.
the weather is good,
Yep.
hot, cold,
Exactly.
rainy, whatever.
Yeah, and I think planning it, find the right moon. So if a guy was to come in and say, hey man, I got 1 day this month to where I can go, and we know these phases and these tide swings months in advance,
Yeah.
right? We can start planning out those things, right? Like, hey man, this Tuesday is gonna be the greatest time to go hooping. It's gonna be the darkest part of the night. There's actually no moon at all. There's not even, and I think for the moon rise and the moon set, that's for like when you do the crescent moons and the full moons, and you wanna say, hey, I still wanna hoop this week. Yeah. I don't wanna take a week off. I don't wanna take 2 weeks off. I wanna hoop this week. But if I was to give one guy, let's go on the darkest night with the best tide swing. Let's do our homework to find that. And you find that day, and then maybe it's 2 weeks out. And then you're on your navionics, right? And you're on your navionics, and the weather's gonna be great, and now you're looking for spots, right? And we got on a kayak, or if you're by yourself, you got 5 hoop nets. If you're with a group of folks, you got 10 hoop nets. So where am I gonna place those 10 hoop nets, right?
Yeah.
And have your spots out marked prior to going out, right? But not just have those spots.
Have backup
Spots,
yeah.
right? Like we have backup spots to where like, hey man, this spot didn't work out for us. We thought it was gonna be killer, like just by looking on a map. But let's go hoop this tiny little stone that maybe people will pass up. This is like going on the ocean, little tiny stringer, right? And you catch a limit of yellowfin tuna off of it.
Yeah.
When the huge patty, you may get 2 fish off, but this tiny little stringer, you get all these fish. So you never know what that tiny stone is gonna produce. And I think by having that backup plan, by having areas on a map, like you said, not just marked as fish, but maybe marked as numbers. Hey, these are the first 5 I'm gonna go to.
Yeah.
And the next 5 I'm gonna go to, next whatever, and start moving things around. And I'm real big on the number system with my buoys, numbering them 1 through 5 or 1 through 10, and moving those buoys around to where the lobster are. Because if you do find the spot, right? You find the stone that's really producing, how are you really gonna know, right? Unless you're doing documentation at night and saying, hey, the number 5 buoy that we put on that stone is really killing it. So let's put like 6 and 7 or 8 on that too. Yeah. And let's put 2, 3, and 4 on another stone, So like in the perfect world, are you gonna have 1 through 10 laid out perfectly? No, not usually. But knowing where your numbers are spread out, because when you just get I tell people this all the time in a seminar, when you just get your buoy out of a bag, it's just a white buoy, and you got to make it a unit, a number, a tool for that night.
And you mentioned, I think we talked about it before we were actually rolling, but an important thing to do too is when you're finding spots on your fish finder or your Navionics app or whatever you're using, lobster spots, make sure that you're using something unique, a little symbol that's unique to identifying it as a lobster spot, right? Because I've had guys before tell me, they're fishing harbors or little concentrated areas where they get calico bass or halibut spots, or and they have all the same little fish icon, and they don't know which is a lobster spot that they killed it at last year and which is a halibut spot that they killed it at for halibut. So making sure to use a different icon for those lobster spots, that'll help you when in a small area where it's a small little stone that you typically get 1 or 2 bugs on. Just making them unique so it's easier to see on a dark night on your fish finder.
Yeah, and adding to that too is like there's a lot of spots in Long Beach that I put on my unit as well, and they're crab spots.
Yeah.
Like you'll get a lot of crab.
Yeah.
And lobsters don't leave you in my experience, they're not gonna get a lot of lobsters with crab. Crab kind of like dominate the area, and lobsters just don't really want to compete with it. So like people will say to me, oh, I do really well at this spot. And I'm like, dude, I have that marked as a crab spot.
Yeah.
And not only just crab spot, but like short crab spot.
Yeah.
So like when you pull up a hoop net full of short crab, of like 30 of them, like they're gonna kick your butt, man. Like pulling those suckers out, and then you're losing time. So knowing what are the lobster spots, knowing what are the crab spots, knowing what, like really organizing, not just on your boat, all the tools and resources on the boat, but on your unit as well and on your phone.
Yeah. And then another thing is we talked about lunar, figuring out, if there's only one day that you can go hooping and it's a full moon and it's just at the worst possible time. If the moon rise is at 5 and sunset is at 5 and then the moon set is at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And it's just the worst possible thing. Well, then you start looking at areas that you're obviously not going to fish an area that's always dark because it's going to be lit up by the moon. But if you're now thinking, if it's the only day you can go, you might want to consider fishing an area like Long Beach Harbor where there's always lights on and it doesn't affect the lobster because they're accustomed to constantly having lights on.
Yeah.
So you learning these tricks to where, it doesn't make sense for me to hoop this area, but the lobster in this area are really not going to care.
Exactly.
So I'm going to hit that area instead. And just making the most of the time that you have available, I think.
And that's going around too, on your downtime, driving around, looking at the lights that are around, even like Mission Bay, or, they got SeaWorld there, you got a lot of lights lit up, like got a lot of bridges overhead, Long Beach Harbor, there's a lot of things that people can do when the moon, say you can hoop 2 hours on the break wall and then you can come in and hoop the rest of the night inside the harbor. And just preparing for those nights is what's super key. And again, we say this over and over again, and is that people, you gotta do your homework, right? You gotta do your homework. The guys that are very successful, we have sweepstakes and things that we do here at Promar, and these guys are just killing the lobsters, right? And you can tell they're doing their homework. They can tell they're just not that guy that's just gonna go out for the night. They're really putting their time in. They're on these websites. They're mapping things, they have all the gear, they're sitting in the seminars, and they're really, really putting their time in. And honestly, those are some guys, I learned from those guys too. I mean, even though I do seminars, and I said this in all my seminars, I'm still constantly learning. I'm still talking to game wardens about regulations as they change. I'm still learning the characteristics of a lobster. Even talking to Jim, it's like, man, you think the guys that knows everything, and he's such a humble guy. He's like, hey man, I'm still learning, and you think, man, he's the godfather of lobster, and I think that's the thing, is like not getting down on yourself on a night that's bad and saying, you know what, man, a lot of people struggled this night.
Yeah.
And this is something we're gonna take from the night by educating ourselves what to do next time.
Well, I think social media has a big part in that, because in the past, before social media existed, you wouldn't see pictures every night of guys just holding a bunch of lobsters. So you wouldn't feel like, dude, I went out and fished for 5 hours and I didn't get any, or I got 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't get as frustrated with it as you do now, because now it's like nobody posts pictures of when they don't catch, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're seeing maybe 5-10 guys that had a great night, but you're not seeing the other 100 guys that didn't get anything.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating on you, because in your eyes, you're like, dude, I'm the only guy that didn't get anything last night.
Yeah.
So just have that in mind, guys. When you're going out and you're seeing all these pictures on social media, it's a small percentage of guys, and usually it's the guys that are putting in a lot of time on the water or have a ton of experience doing this. They've done it for years, and they've logged constantly, and they know which areas to hit and when to hit them. So that's something that is just going to take time and time on the water for you to be able to kind of just work that into your system to where when obstacles get in the way, when weather conditions get in the way, you already know, okay, well, I can't fish this spot, but I can fish this spot.
Yeah.
And then you end up picking up a few, maybe a limit, who knows. And then also, like we mentioned earlier, building a network, right?
Yes.
So I know it's hard to build a network, but there's a lot of great places, forums online, Facebook groups, the Bloody Decks forums.
Yeah.
I mean, I go on there from time to time and I see guys, hey, I'm lobster hooping. You know, I'm new to it, but if somebody wants to join me that has some experience, I'd be happy to, you know, host somebody. So finding people that you can network with, go out, share information, and then even like going on a charter boat that offers lobster hooping, or going with a guy like yourself, going out with these people that are more knowledgeable on this topic than you are, and talking to them and saying, hey, you know, I have my own boat, I really want to do this. I've tried it a couple times, or I'm new to it completely. I want to go out with you so you can teach me. And that way, when you share that with them, they can kind of have it on their mind that, okay, I need to teach him these basic things so that he can apply them towards, you know, him going on his own boat and doing this. So using those tools, and I know people say, you know, it's pretty expensive to charter someone, but in reality, it's not that expensive when you take into consideration the knowledge that you're going to be gaining.
Exactly.
And you're going to be able to use it for years and years and years to get all those lobster.
And to work out those kinks, man, it takes guys like ourselves years to learn them, and then we teach somebody that in 5 minutes.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. And
I think when just talking about networking real quick, you know, you catch more bees with honey, right?
Right.
Like, be kind, guys. Like, I think the fishing world is just, with anything, you know, it could be like kick rocks kind of a thing. And, you know, I've been in the position I am, and maybe I'm too nice, right? But it's like, work together, you know, there's a lot of lobster out there. And so people say, man, I got skunked, you know, we go out and we're the Promar guys and we get skunked, you know, but we learn from the night. And I think by getting with a group of folks that hoop net, and even mixing in a couple divers, which you talk about, like being friends with divers that know the bottom, you know, that maybe don't even lobster hoop or go lobstering, but maybe this recreational dive, you know, for fun.
It's the biggest thing. I mean, you can only see so much on your fish finder, right? Underwater. So if you can manage to make a friend with a diver, say, hey dude, I'll take you out on my boat, you can dive, just maybe shoot some video with my GoPro down there. I want to see what it's like down there. I want to see where I'm placing my hoop nets, where if there's even any lobster down there. I mean, even if it's during the day, just say, hey dude, I'll take you out, you know, a couple hours, shoot some video for me so I can see what it's like down there. I'm sure they appreciate getting a free ride out there, and then you're getting so much knowledge from doing something like that. And then you build a friendship. You know, those guys have friends too. So, you know, maybe before a trip, hey, I'm gonna be hooping this area. Have you dove it lately? No, but my buddy has. Let me talk to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so he saw tons of lobster down there. So just building a network, being a little bit more friendly, because you never know when that friendship's gonna help out.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing, man. It's just the kindness and working together as a, you know, find the people you trust, of course, and the people you get along with, but making sure the people in your network, like you got hoopers in your network, you got bass guys in your network, you got divers in your network, you got captains, you got kayakers, making sure you want to be really good at this, making sure that you have a network of people that you can rely on in those times.
Yeah, so one other thing that I personally like to do is, once I've gone on my Navionics app or my fish finder, and I have spots that I think look really good based on just the structure that I see on the fish finder, if it's a known spot, like I'll just throw out Long Beach Breakwall, for example. If it's a known spot, what I like to do is I like to go on YouTube and type in Long Beach Breakwater Dive.
Yeah.
And then I can watch all these videos of what the breakwall looks like underwater. Yeah. And I can say, you know, okay, this looks really good, or this area of the breakwall doesn't look so good. And there's a ton of videos, I mean, just those type of resources online. And that's just something that I don't really think anyone's ever talked about in regards to lobster hooping, but it's something that it just helps you understand what environment you're really putting your hoop nets in, and whether or not it's an environment that looks like it'll be appealing to a lobster to live in.
Yeah.
Because you got sections of the break wall, I know closer to closer to San Pedro, you have this break wall section that's basically big cubes of concrete that don't offer really a lot of areas for lobster to crawl and hide in. However, like the Federal Long Beach side, it's just big rocks stacked on top of each other where there's a lot of crevices. And underwater, I mean, that I would imagine that would be great places for lobster to hide in. So understanding the structure and trying to see it visually underwater, if you can, I think is a big benefit. Is there anything else that you do besides things that are just not really typical for guys to use as a resource to help you decide whether or not an area is good or whether you want to fish an area?
I think we kind of covered it all, but I think for me is just being flexible. And I think you kind of hit it on the head. And I'm glad we're talking about it. It's just the social media aspect of it, of people holding up bugs, and then the anticipation of like, hey, I'm gonna go with the Promar guys and we're just gonna get a limit of bugs tonight. And I think then people like go out, they get a bug, and they think that, you know, I'm not good at this, or this is the worst thing in the world. And I think for me is preparing myself to know the biggest part of hooping, and I think fishing in general, is not that you're failing, but it's fishing, right? Like, it's not catching. And I think that if we're always catching, it would, first of all, it wouldn't be fun. People say, oh, it would be a blast, but there would be no work towards it, and the effort and the reward of like rigging and dropping a net. And I think for me, what I do differently, I think that a lot of guys don't do, is they preparing yourself mentally for the night. Yeah. You know,
setting your expectations.
And maybe it's because tournament fishing my whole life and knowing like, hey, I'm not gonna hit a home run today.
Anything can happen.
Yeah, and like, but I'm not looking to hit a home run.
Right.
Like, I just want a single, right? And if I get a single today and a single tomorrow and I'm scoring runs, right? Like, I'm not looking to hit there's nights, believe me, I hit a grand slam, and I will appreciate those nights. But I think for the actual everyday hooper, and I hear it all the time, is their expectation and preparing their mind for what they're going out there for. But if you change your thought process and saying, listen, I'm going out to learn a different area.
Yeah.
I'm going out to try a different bait. I'm going out to try a different hoop net, whether it's a 32 to the 36. I'm going out to try a different light stick, or we're just gonna switch things up to make the night more exciting, to get you closer to the goals that you want. And I think for me, that's kind of what I do differently than a lot of guys, is I set my expectations different, you know, to where I'm gonna do everything that I possibly can, right? I've checked the weather, I checked the tide, I checked the moon phase. You checked everything off your box. You've been in the doctor's office looking at navionics, you've been on the couch, you've been doing all your mapping. But now what it comes to is the mind game of it, of can I continue doing this, right? Could I continue to put the work in? And I guarantee you guys, and I can speak for this, for the experience, that if you continue to put the work in and you continue to do the research, you will be successful on the water. And I just have stories and stories of not just my life in general with fishing tournaments or hooping that can prove that.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered most of the things that we wanted to talk about. I mean, for people that are interested in learning more about the basics and the gear and how to outfit your boat, we have tons of resources on our YouTube channel and on our website, promarahi.com, and our YouTube channel is Promar and Ahi. You can check those out. I think for what we wanted to cover in regards to things that are not typically discussed in videos that are about lobster hooping, I think we've covered it. And if you guys are looking for more information, give us a call in the office, reach out on social media. Gil, where can people reach out to you?
You can get me on Instagram at Rockit, or Facebook at Rockit, or you can even shoot me an email if you have a question at gilrockit@hotmail.com. But for sure, visit my social media. I post videos. I always link the Promar videos as well. And whenever I'm doing on a hooping adventure, I always put a link or something, or a photo of how I did that day. And I also do a lot of product new products that comes out, I always demo it on my social media as well. So please follow me, Gil Rockit. That's GILROCKIT, not ETIT, and Instagram or Facebook.
All right, guys, so me and Gil are gonna be bringing you guys a lot more resources this season. We're gonna be doing more videos, more posts, more just blogs, everything in regards to lobster roofing. So stay tuned for that. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you guys out on the water.